This is EntreEd Talk, the podcast for entrepreneurial educators by entrepreneurial educators. We are your hosts, Toi Hirschman and
Amber Ravenscroft. This podcast is created by the National Consortium for Entrepreneurship Education, or EntreEd for short.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to EntreEd Talk. We have with us today a very, very good friend, Enoch Elwell, and he is just going to knock your socks off. Enoch has been involved with startups since his grade school popsicle stand, with his latest adventure being a luxury treehouse retreat, treetophideaways.com. Don't think we won't find out more about that. Driven by a passion to help others, Enoch currently supports hundreds of emerging startup communities through the Co.Starters platform, helping local ecosystem builders around the world take the first steps in accelerating the success of thousands of creative starters annually. Together, these non-traditional small business owners are growing a thriving culture of collaborative entrepreneurial support in their communities. Enoch is committed to accelerating the convergence of economic development and community development beyond the Co.Starters community, and is globally recognized for his expertise providing strategic support to the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation in establishing the field of ecosystem building through the eShip Summit community, as a founding board member of the Startup Champions Network, and as a founder of the Rural Rise National Network. Welcome, Enoch. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hi, Toi. It's great to be here. Really excited about it.
Awesome. Well, we're going to get started. You have so much to talk about. We're not going to cover it all probably, but just to back up before we dive into all of your newer adventures, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and your own entrepreneurial journey and, how you got to where you are today?
People like myself and you and others who kind of don't fit in a lot of the other pieces of the existing entrepreneurial support system have a huge opportunity to one, I guess, be healthier people, getting to do what we love, getting to survive and thrive financially, and also getting to contribute to the community around us to help our local community, our local culture improve and grow and thrive as well. And so I think a lot of the story of my work and I guess that what brought me to my work is really the wider narrative of how do just regular people figure out how to find a good trajectory in life and to maybe accelerate that journey or make that journey possible through entrepreneurship. So with that being said, my original life goal was actually to not follow the traditional path of getting that degree and getting a real job and all that kind of stuff, because my goal was to be the world's best guitar maker. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to make guitars and make the best guitars and just potter away in a workshop and make beautiful things, right? That was a wonderful dream, and I oriented my life around that. I started making guitars and started actually apprentice under a leader in the industry to learn a skill. And along the way, I learned great skills, got to build wonderful things. But I realized that when you look at the reality of what success was in that world, there was a lot of missing pieces. For example, there were a lot of people who were recognized as the best in making guitars, but didn't have the best family lives, right? Some people were very isolated and frustrated, and maybe that negative stereotype that you sometimes hear of that, like, the creative who's kind of, so obsessed with the craft that everything else around them fades away. And I realized I didn't want to go down that route, that kind of, the negative version of creative expression, right? And then at the same time, I also wanted to be able to make enough money to support a family and, be able to take care of the people around me. And what was interesting is people who were making some of the most beautiful guitars were having trouble selling them because they were making what they loved and nobody else wanted. And so through that experience, I realized just creative expression in isolation is not enough. There needs to be an equal balance of community and relationship and economic sustainability, right?
Right.
So along the way, that made me realize I got to figure out some other pieces here, right? So the advice I got at the time was, well, go to business school and figure out the business piece, right? So I went on my merry way. It brought me down to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where I live now. And believe it or not, that was almost more frustrating in many ways, because I realized a typical business degree preparing you for finding your corporate niche had very little, if anything, to do with launching and running a creative small enterprise. And so out of that frustration, really, just wanting to just make beautiful things and have a wonderful life, right? I realized that there's a need here, not just for myself, but many other people in Chattanooga at the time who were trying to share some kind of creative expression, some kind of thing that they deeply believed in and wanted to share with others, help others contribute to their community. They wanted to make it sustainable, but it really wasn't about the money. Business was just the stuff that got in the way of trying to do something meaningful, do something important, care for others, and find a way to, pay the bills and, provide for the people around them, right? And so we got together as this small community of misfits, mostly creatives, artists, artisans, makers, musicians, and we started trying to figure out how can we make our work more sustainable. And that's really what began the process, which resulted in the launch of Co.Starters, the kind of development of this wider Co.Starters community. And we really I haven't stopped kind of pushing that question today. Just fortunately with a whole lot more people and a whole lot more support and a whole lot more energy and excitement and the growing around the wider conversation around economic development and community development. How do these intersect? So it's exciting to see this kind of individual story and kind of story in a corner of Chattanooga grow to become something that's more recognized and more, I think, on the minds of people everywhere.
Yeah, that's awesome. I did not realize going from guitars to like this Co.Starters network. That's so neat to think about the different trajectories in life. And I love what you said about like how it's one thing to follow your passion, but you also have to be able to live and be sustainable, like from an economic standpoint. Mm-hmm. So Toi and I are familiar with Co.Starters. We're involved with a lot of the same kind of connections that we have, but I think that our viewers would really, or our listeners, not viewers, because we don't do video, our listeners would benefit from learning a little bit more about Co.Starters. And you already kind of mentioned this term, and it's a big one that's growing in the entrepreneurship landscape, is this idea of ecosystem building. So if you could talk a little bit about like what is ecosystem building from a broad sense, and how does Co.Starters kind of fit and help evolve and grow that kind of dimension?
It's always fun. There's, a new buzzword popping up every day. And I think in the world of economic development, ecosystem building is probably the biggest buzzword right now, right?
Yep.
And so I think in some ways it's almost like it's lost its meaning before people figured out what it meant. And so I just want to recognize that. A lot of people will be like, ecosystem building, that's what those weird hipsters are talking about over in a corner. That doesn't mean anything, right? And then there's other people who are like, oh, ecosystem building, if I put a trendy title on what I'm doing, then it's cool now, right? And that's really not the point. It's not about the word. It's not even about defining the word. So I'd rather tell a little bit of a story around the idea behind this all, because some people call it ecosystem building. Some people call it entrepreneur-led economic development. Some people just call it, community development. Some people call it, the evolution of economic development, right? It doesn't matter what you call it. The point is, I think, understanding what the current moment is in our society as a whole, like our entire culture. And I want to take that as big picture as you can go, because the experts agree that the industrial age as we know it is coming to its end. And whatever the next age of humanity is we're at the threshold. And so we got to look in those types of terms to really understand what this idea is. So to try to simplify or summarize it into one idea, it's how does economic development as we know it, and maybe have looked at it in a small view, how does that evolve and survive and thrive and reinvent as we shift out of the industrial age into this new age? Some people call it the connected age. That's the question in which this ecosystem building term is popping up as one possible way to explain this evolution. Is that the current systems of economic development, while they've served our society very well for a period of time, are not fully adequate to serve the issues that we face as a society today and going forward. And so we know some things need to change. right? The smokestack chasing model, right, is no longer in vogue, right? This idea of we're just going to recruit the big industry to come in and hopefully they stay and hopefully don't disappear and leave a big hole in our community, hopefully, right? We're starting to realize maybe that's not the only method that should be considered. And there's, you know, some potential downsides there, right? That have been well recognized. So I think that's one frame. The other frame is that, and this is one thing that I talk a lot about in communities where we have these conversations, is one of the maybe pushing the language a little to say one of the relics of the industrial age. Maybe we can't say that yet. One of the assumptions that we all kind of carry being products of the industrial age, right, all of us together, is this idea that the best way to move things forward is to segment, focus on one little piece, operationalize, efficient, you know, make something as efficient as possible and scale that thing up, you know, with minimizing variables, right? Minimize variables, make efficient, scale. That's the best way you can make impact, right? And while that's true for a lot of things, for some really kind of strange new things that are emerging, that model does not work. So one of the things that I think is really important in understanding the shift is some of the assumptions we have in general around this idea that the best way to move the best things forward is to minimize variables, to maximize efficiency in moving forward on those variables and scale up output. So very focused, very constrained, very defined, and that is where we have success. And that served as well for a lot of things, but there's some new things popping up that don't work for that model and completely break the system. And this is a question that we have to answer. How do we work with these new things? There's a book that's called Team of Teams, written by General Stanley McChrystal, that explains one of the best examples of this evolution. And that is post 9/11 fighting these terrorism networks, where the best of the industrial age, right, all of these special force units of the United States military, the most efficient, the most fine-tuned machine, right, that people could point to as an example, could not defeat the terrorist networks and were getting owned because the terrorist networks were complex adaptive systems that could just morph and change and completely just work around the most fine-tuned processes we had, you know, for our age. And that really sparked this huge question of how do we evolve our military system to address a new type of community, a new type of doing, a new process of decision-making, an entirely new animal, right? It was really a battle of the industrial age and the connected age, and how do these two, interrelate with each other? And so in this book, they really flesh out all these models of how they had to adapt their entire system to change. It was actually changing their organizational structures that made the difference, believe it or not. Checking out this book if you want to dig deeper into an example of this transition.
Very cool. Very cool. So,
sorry, I derailed us from ecosystem building.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, there's a lot to unpack here, but I'm like fascinated by all of it, and I appreciate this. And Toi, I know you look like you're just ready to ask a million questions. So,
yeah, I'll be reading the book in the car if there's an audio version for sure. That is really just thinking about that industrial age versus the connected age and how everything is changing. And you know, I know, Enoch, you spend a lot of time in rural America, as do we, and it really is a mindset shift that has to happen overall. Like, I mean, people think that people that really do in many cases think that a big, like, let's just get the next big coal company or whatever it is. Let's get the next big company in here and everyone will have a job. But we have to think differently than that now. And it's really interesting how that's probably the biggest hurdle, is getting people's minds around that concept of, you know, you're not, coal company's not coming back here, you know, the big paper mill, we just had a big closure locally to me. I mean, it's not happening. So what do we do now?
And, you know, along those lines, one of the things that's really interesting, we were just, so we have our own Co.Starters, like webinar series where last week we interviewed Matt Dunn, who heads up the Center on Rural Innovation, to talk about these very same things. And one of the things that came out of that conversation that illustrates, I think, what you're talking about is this idea that those systems, those models of the past that built a lot of these communities, they're not bad and they're not wrong.
Mm-mm.
It's that they served their purpose, they had their time, and now we move to the next thing. And I think we have to recognize that communities, like cultures, are, the sum of just all these individual relationships people have with each other, but also the relationships that people have with the place and with the past. And so a lot of this is actually going through the stages of grief and going through change that happens in any other relationship. Parents with their children, us with the trauma of our past and the personal things we work through. It's the same type of stuff. And so in any community, we're trying to forge into this new unknown, the teenage years, right? Like, it's a scary thing that we don't know, this connected age coming. And at the same time, we have this past that we remember, and we remember with fondness, and we wish it could come back, but it can't. And so we're processing through like a personal growth journey, right? As individuals and collectively as a community through this. And that's a really important thing. And so some of this is celebrating the past, recognizing its place, and at the same time being able to kind of boldly go forward and grow together in this, and kind of like a maybe not growing up, but maybe just growing forward together. I don't know. So it's a much more complicated, nuanced, and relational thing in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I can think, and Toi, I know we're from the same area, so I know how that affected, and I can definitely see that the stages of grief are like, that makes total sense to me, especially when those industries are kind of taken away and people are forced to change. And I think that makes total sense. Okay, so now this whole conversation, like keeping that in mind, Enoch, maybe if you could tell us a little bit about how Co.Starters starts addressing that, like the company's mission and like the work that you all do to help address that, would be really helpful.
Great. Yeah, so I guess we should talk about Co.Starters somewhere here.
Yeah, we should maybe talk about Co.Starters.
The purpose of Co.Starters is really to find our piece to help, address this big problem, need and opportunity. And so this is a huge shift. This is a huge change. I think it's both the crisis and the opportunity to build a more, equitable society right here being thrust upon us, right? It's the big wave that's coming, that's going to reshape things, reset things, and clean the sand up a little bit, right? So to me, the big question is, how can we, through this time of change as a wider society, and specifically through economic development and entrepreneurship, how can we help build a better system? And how can we help people weather and survive the change too, right? So how Co.Starters fits into this? We are the specific place we're trying to play is this focus on developing scalable processes to help communities thrive through entrepreneurship, right? So that's a very specific language, but very open at the same time. You could say the scalable processes is about trying to, and somehow through a lot of careful listening and, cautious moving forward, we've been able to find ways that have consistently packaged and scaled very relational and nuanced and, difficult to capture things. We like to say we scale up, community relationship building without losing the magic, right? Which is really hard to do. And so we've had success in that. So that's kind of the unique thing we bring. And then the goal is to help communities. So that's individuals and, the community as a whole. And so we see that working together. You help individuals thrive in the context of a thriving community, which, the individuals make the community thrive, the thriving community helps the individuals thrive. That all happens together. It's all community based. And then we do all this stuff because that starts sounding really touchy-feely and, yay, let's all build community and hang out together. So we do all this stuff through the specific frame and lens and engagement model of entrepreneurship. So that's through launching businesses, growing businesses, building entrepreneurial mindset, and through businesses, pushing social change, right? And I mean that, the whole impact business thing. You don't have to be a nonprofit to do good work. You can do that in a sustainable business, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the package of Co.Starters. For those of you who like to get down to the details and that still sounds too esoteric, we started by building curriculum because that's what people think they needed. Everybody thinks I need better entrepreneurship curriculum. So we developed our flagship program. We're most known for a 9-week cohort-based model that helps people with existing businesses or ideas for business get unstuck and move forward to strongly, confidently pursue the next steps for their business. We developed 15 other various types of curriculum for impact businesses, for youth entrepreneurship, for pure accountability and growing businesses, all kinds of other stuff. Then we also have a significant amount of activity where we consult with national global networks and organizations that have been scaling up some kind of either community building work or entrepreneurship support work, and they want to better integrate those two together. So we help retool people's processes or systems or community engagement models to live out that intersection of economic development and community development, building up people, building up relationships, building up community through entrepreneurship. So that's Co.Starters.
How would somebody get involved with Co.Starters initially? And speak to that as if I'm a business owner or someone with a business idea, and then also as a student, as a maybe a middle or high school student.
Right. So the way we work, our primary focus is actually on supporting community leaders, right? And so we help community leaders come together to find how to best provide, you could say, the best stack of entrepreneurial support resources to then support their local community, right? And so we now support over 130 communities globally, work with those local community leaders to build strong networks of support for the local entrepreneurs. So to answer your question, the best way to get that help, what we believe, is getting plugged in with that local community of support. Many communities that have, I would strongly say any community where there's a Co.Starters, presence where those local people are organizing in that way, I know that they're there to welcome and support and encourage and help you figure out your way forward. So if you are a student or someone with an existing business, if, you could search and see, on our website, if there's a Co.Starters community in your area, and I'm confident that if there is, they would welcome you with open arms and give you a hug if you need it, right? And so that's one network. But there's a whole lot of other networks out there that are just as welcoming and supporting, and I would highly recommend finding the local support that already exists. That could be a 1 Million Cups, that could be one of the Techstars startup weekends that's coming, that could be the EntreEd network, right? There's lots of great places to go, but that local support is so valuable. Again, Co.Starters, we're focused more on supporting the local leaders to, if there isn't a kind of a safe, welcoming space for people, local starters to find support, to help make that happen. What's also, I think, very important, Co.Starters, we're not about us, we're not about our programs, we're not about our models, we're about helping local leaders connect entrepreneurs of all kinds with the best stuff that exists. And so most of our work is actually connecting people with other resources and saying, you know what? This Co.Starters curriculum that we developed for this specific use isn't what you need. Y'all need EntreEd, use them, right? And so that's primarily why we exist, to help the right set of resources be made available in local communities, and then also those resources be interconnected with each other so they provide more holistic support. Because often a starter in a community might go through a great program, and then once they're out of that model, they get dropped and have to find their way, to the next thing. And so the interconnectedness is what's missing so much. So again, our primary support is on supporting local leaders, building that strong, collaboration and that full stack of support in local communities. And then those local organizations are who provide that direct support to starters.
I love that. Joe Cap, who, Enoch, I know you work with closely with Rural Rise, he always talks about the principles of effectuation and this idea of crazy quilt. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're describing, is just connecting those people and that, like, everyone is better when you work together. So I really like that. And I know you touched on this when you talked about your different curriculum offerings at Co.Starters, and you know that EntreEd works primarily in K-12 entrepreneurship education. So can you talk just very briefly about Co.Starters youth programming and why you think that was important for the company to go into K-12 entrepreneurship growth?
Yeah, that's great. So first of all, I think we all, anybody who's listening to this podcast, I assume, agrees that it's, entrepreneurial education is important, particularly for youth. And so I'm just going to base off of that foundation that an entrepreneurial mindset is essential, I think, just for succeeding in life in general, in the world in general, but also because of this shift that we have where our current education system, at least I believe from my understanding, has been optimized for providing people with skills that serve well for the industrial age. Finding that niche skill that is not as adaptable necessarily. One of the big issues that is here is our education system has not adapted as quickly as it needs to address the needs of our changing economy and our changing society. And an entrepreneurial mindset, not at all trying to say that everybody should launch a business or anything like that, but an entrepreneurial mindset to see problems, to have agency in addressing problems, and to find ways to do something about that and organize together as people to solve the problems of our society and solve our own problems is essential for navigating the shift as a society. And so I can't think of a better way to help prepare our society for the future than through building entrepreneurial skills and mindsets. So that's the fundamental, I believe, coming into this conversation. Is there anything you want to add to that, Toi?
I could add so much. My heart is in everything that you were just talking about, because I believe that generally, not all, and we're working diligently to change this, but generally our schools do a really good job of sucking that entrepreneurial mindset out of kids. And when you look at a kindergarten or first grade classroom, they haven't been put in that box yet, and you can ask these kids questions, and it's amazing what comes out of these really, really young kids. And then as you move up the chain, it just gets more and more sterile and more rules based. And exactly what you're talking about is it is optimized to crank out factory workers.
What is it, like norm, conform, and perform or something like
that?
Yeah.
And that was great in its time. There was nothing really wrong with that. Like you said, that was so compelling to me when you said it, that worked before, but it's not working now. And we're not moving in the direction that we need to be moving with our students. And, when we talk about entrepreneurship, Amber and I, we get this all the time. When we go into a place, you probably do too, the first thought is business, like a business degree, business, marketing, financial literacy, all of those things that are really important, but not really what we're talking about when we're talking about entrepreneurship, education, and mindsets. And like you said, those mindsets are going to help regardless of whether you start a business or you go to work for somebody else. Because, not everyone in the world is going to start a business.
Man,
that's not realistic.
Yeah, you're getting me excited, or just fired up about this too, because oh man, yeah, we go for a long time. This one concept though I gotta share is we, like humans, have been launching businesses for thousands of years. Here, I'll trade you this, this spear that I chipped out of rock for, this this pile of vegetables or whatever, right? Like, people have been doing this stuff. It's kind of intuitive to human nature. And it was only recently, the past few hundred years, that we got things complicated with these MBAs and, all these other things. And those aren't bad either. But as the barrier to entry, this is why entrepreneurship is on the decline, because we've somehow made it this elite and accessible thing. Whereas in the reality, most people did this without a second thought. It was just part of human existence. And I think we need to bring entrepreneurship back to the people here, right? This is stuff that we do, and then people can be specialized and, layer stuff on top of it. And great, if you do something great and, it needs to grow, well, hire the MBA, right? But you don't need that to start figuring things out. Anyway, I'll get on a soapbox if you keep going here. So we probably should roll. I never answered your question, Amber.
I don't remember my question.
The question was, so Co.Starters has youth programming. How does that work?
Yes.
So youth programming is very important in building an entrepreneurial mindset. And we had a lot of people in the Co.Starters communities who were asking, can you offer some youth programming, some youth curriculum? And at first we said, no, there's lots of great stuff out there. Use all the other stuff. And then we saw an opportunity to help fill in some gaps around providing some some very flexible resources that help people. Pretty much we created a modular curriculum or modular set of content that could be reconfigured to serve any need, to either be a light, entrepreneurship mindset program, to be a weekend test and launch a business idea, exercise, to be something that could potentially connect one program with another, just to fill the gaps. And so the idea was to not be the comprehensive thing that competes with the other stuff, but that it fills in the gaps and help provide more on-ramps to the good stuff that's out there. So for example, I think right now there is a training going on at the World Scout Jamboree that EntreEd is leading, that Toi here are trained the facilitators of this workshop, and they're using some of the content that we provide in our toolkit. And so the goal is we want to be the people who play well with others on the sandbox here, where we can provide lots of good resources that just help good stuff move forward and not try to be anything more. And so that's what the entrepreneurship content we have is for youth. We have Girl Scouts using it for their Gold Award at their camps. We have school systems using it across their networks as a kind of a light kind of entry program. We have a really neat kind of lock-in model where kids from across several schools across a region will do a overnight, it's called 24-hour generator, where they actually launch business solutions for existing businesses that get implemented in their community. And it's a competition that, diverse teams of students launch stuff over a weekend. It's so cool. So anyway, we could talk about that more, but the goal is to just support and supplement and augment the great things that are out there.
I already know we're going to have a second episode, because we try to keep it, we say this every time, but I mean it, folks. We try to keep it around 30 minutes, and somehow we only answered like 2 questions. I want to talk really briefly about your title, because I love the idea of a director of vision, just for everyone who's listening, and CEO obviously, but you list yourself as director of vision on the Co.Starters website. So, I mean, what's it like being that person that has that visionary kind of, like, what were your biggest hurdles? How did you, navigate that leadership role where you are today? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So that's a good question. I really believe that, again, for the future of where we're headed as a society, things need to change, right? The industrial age models of hierarchies and like the boss knows it all and tells all the worker bees to do the stuff, like that is not helpful. And is not transformative which is what we need for communities, right? And so I think one of the best things that we can do as teams and as leaders of teams is to be very self-aware and aware of our limitations, and also aware of the model in which we're living out, a leadership or organizational structure. So with that, a common problem of many organizations is the person who in some way rallied people together around the vision of an organization often ends up, as the CEO and as the chief implementer and chief visionary and chief chaos creator and chief micromanager and chief everything, and everything works from their lens only, and kind of creates some good but potentially a lot of mess too, because we're messy people. And one of the things that I found to be really valuable is to recognize typically someone who is a visionary, who has ideas, who sees things in the future, is not necessarily the best operational manager, implementer of a vision, right? And to mix those two up can be very destructive. And so there's a model another book I'd recommend called Traction. And this model called the Traction, or EOS, the Entrepreneurship Operating System. It's a play off of the Rockefeller habits from long ago and Verne Harnish and all these other things. But the general idea of organizational structures being recognized, where you have 2 separate roles, right? Not the one lone CEO at the top who tells everyone what to do, but an integrator and a visionary. Visionary is free to look toward the future, to see how an organization can kind of orient itself in a way to solve the big problems of the world, and the integrator to make sure that the team is really doing the right activities to move toward that vision, but not mixing it all up, right? And so, in a moment of becoming more self-aware through a lot of coaching and support, I realized that I was holding our organization back by not having strong boundaries, right? And strong knowing what my role is and optimizing into that role and stepping out of the roles that are not my skills. And so at that point, we created our structure to very clearly be visionary and integrator working together to support a team. I think that was very valuable. Along with that, our theme for the year as a team is vulnerable growth. This idea that if our goal is to help individuals and communities thrive everywhere, through entrepreneurship, right? That's what Co-Starters exist to do. If our team isn't thriving, and if us individually on the team aren't thriving, then it's all a lie. Like, we're not actually, it's not real. We can only go as far as we've gone. And so a lot of that is not just me finding my role in stepping back from a lot of the management of Co-Starters, because that's not my skill. It's also each of us on our team trying to figure out what is our best role. And let's not try to just do all our weaknesses too, but how do we support and champion the people around us who are strong where we're weak, and celebrate that and work together. So it's a little bit, sorry, another long-winded response.
It was great. I think I'm going to look up that book. I'm really fascinated by that idea of separating those roles, because I think that there's a lot of that kind of overlap in any kind of entrepreneurial support or entrepreneurship organization. So I'm really glad you went deep into that and kind of changed the trajectory of that answer.
And it's really a really clear way to think about it. I read the Good to Great book not too terribly long ago, and I love the analogy that they use in that book, where it's make sure you have the right people, but make sure you put the right, get all your people on your bus that are the right people, but make sure they're in the right seats as well. And that happens a lot of times in organizations. You have great people, but they're not in the right role. And then it's figuring out, it takes a leader that can figure that out and to be humble. So I love that vulnerable growth idea. It just, to be humble enough to say, you know what? I'm not so good at this management stuff. Like, let me find someone who is, so that I can do what I'm good at. And that's such a powerful thing. And that's hard for a leader to do. To admit that and to be able to, okay, here's the issue. I'm going to solve this problem. So that's really cool.
So trying, but it takes a lot of growth. But definitely, I think we're at the stage where most organizations get stuck and actually die because of that transition. Because when you start, it's kind of the founding team who kind of has to solve all the problems, and it all comes from them, and they're the ones with the answers. And to shift from that to being okay with not having the answers, and probably assuming that you don't have the answers because you're bringing people around you who have, who are more skilled, right, at specialized things. So that kind of inverts. And instead it's, how do I support all the people who have the answers and have the knowledge, the team, to thrive? Because together, they have the value, and the value doesn't come from the top. The value is a team supported by some leaders. So I think it's a different kind of model of leadership as well. Anyway, we could go on about that as well.
Yeah. So if you want to talk really briefly about, what Rural Rise is, and I think that's a really good opportunity as they have their Rural Rise conference coming up, if you want to just highlight that.
What's really fun is we're talking about these concepts, and we share a lot of kind of purpose and kind of reason for existing as organizations. I love kind of diving into that a little bit earlier. And it's neat to see this shared work that we're engaged in with the Scout Jamboree, but also want to talk about Rural Rise, this event that's organizing national leaders that care about supporting rural communities, building rural ecosystems, and local rural community leaders together. That's also a network that we've both been a part of here since its start about a year ago. So just want to share a little bit about that. The past, 3 years now, I've been working with the Kauffman Foundation on developing, kind of moving forward this concept of what does an ecosystem building approach to economic development look like? How do you build strong communities and culture and kind of support networks, both locally, but also regionally and nationally and kind of across a whole field? And so with that work, one of the areas where we saw a lot of opportunity to move quickly is in rural communities, because there already are a lot of strong networks and relationships. I think if there's one thing that rural communities have a competitive advantage on, is leveraging the value of relationship. With working with the Kauffman Foundation, and then working with some early work that Joe Kapp and his team had been doing, as well as the RCAP team in DC, we ended up launching the Rural Rise Summit last year, which was the first of its kind gathering of leading organizations from all around the country that support rural communities from a national perspective, and then local regional leaders who are just working hard in their local community to build up entrepreneurial culture. And so that was a really amazing event. We published a report on kind of a status of rural communities, all that stuff you can see at ruralrise.org. And just wanted to make sure we get this out as we wrap up our podcast conversation today, that that convening is happening again in September in Arkansas. So check out the website, ruralrise.org, for more information. But if you're working in a rural community and are looking at what activities are happening now nationally and regionally that you can be inspired by, that you can rip off, that you can be celebrated, by meeting peers, we'd love to join you there and talk more.
And I had the pleasure of going to the inaugural summit with Rural Rise, and the format, you don't sit still for very long, and you can't possibly get bored. It was a really just a winning formula, because we heard from so many amazing speakers, and they had to be very brief. And then we had lots of time to network and talk and collaborate with everyone there. It was phenomenal. So I will second your, please come, you should check out Rural Rise. So everybody, please go check that out. It was really a fabulous conference.
Great. And I guess, we talked earlier about this community building stuff and how Co.Starters helps communities build. And, our goal is to connect local leaders with the best resources everywhere, whether or not the resources that we have, right? If that's something that you're thinking, man, in my community, I'd love to figure out how to move forward a strong culture of support for entrepreneurship. How can this grassroots activity grow and build and help help evolve our community as we figure out the future? We'd love to help. And so if that's something you're interested in, you can go to our website, co-starters.co, to find out more about our work. I think specifically we've developed this matchmaking model where we do a little bit of a kind of an assessment of what your local needs are, what you're looking for, and then develop a kind of the fast version, the lean version of an action plan to just what can you do today now with a short timeline, not a lot of money, just to get some stuff moving forward to address the needs in your community. So if that's something that you would like to explore further, we'd love to talk with you guys more about that, see how we can help.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. And if there's anybody that's interested in connecting with you personally, are you on Twitter, LinkedIn, anything like that?
So yeah, if you'd love to continue the conversation one-to-one, please contact me via email, my name at co-starters.co, or on Twitter, which is just Enoch Elwell.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. We're so appreciative of your time. And Toi, any final thoughts? I know this has been a great, just like learning opportunity for us.
Well, Enoch, you're brilliant. I'm not the first person to tell you that. This has been amazing, and I hope that you will concede to let us having you back on again, maybe for a part 3 or 4. we have just nipped at the tip of the iceberg on so many different things. So I thank you for being here, and I'm sure our listeners will be appreciative to hear from you again. That would be amazing.
Well, thanks. This has been a lot of fun. And really looking forward to what we do as organizations individually and together in the months coming forward to help move forward the good work. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.